This is the only work he does in weeks. Look at him. What story?
Your what story?
His deer story. So he hits a deer with his Honda, and it instantly pissed him off because he had just fixed the car. And he said as soon as he hits it, he just grabs the e-brake, comes to a stop, and the deer had kind of slung up against the fence, and he ran out and grabbed the thing, and thought the thing was dead. So, but it turns out he only knocked it out. But he thought he killed it, puts it in the hatchback, and he's driving down the road, and all of a sudden, bam! Deer in the dash. And he said he just grabbed it with his arm and hauls for his buddy's house, or I don't know where you went to. Then he goes in there and, what'd you call your buddy, or you?
No, I was beating on his bedroom door.
They get a gun.
I drug it in my buddy's house. I was yelling at him to come outside with the gun, to shoot it, and he was calling me a liar. And then it kicked me and escaped. So then I chased it to his house and tackled it in the middle of the living room, and I beat it to death in the middle of the living room.
Today we've got Bill Cogdale's truck on the dyno. This is an 06 Mega Cab that we put a transmission in I believe it was December of 2017. And he came back up with his daughter's truck. We put a street track transmission in her 97. And he wanted to put his 06 back on the dyno. When he was here in 17, we put it on the dyno, tuned a max effort tune into it, and it did 551 horsepower on a completely stock engine, which was really good numbers. Since then, he actually had an injector nozzle blow the tip off, and it embedded in the piston, messed up the head a little bit, and they put it back together, and he bought new Cummins injectors from a Cummins shop in Texas. And we put it, and he said ever since he put it all back together, it felt flat, like it was missing horsepower. So we want to put it back on the dyno, see what it made. Today we put it on here, it made 477 horsepower, which is like 72 horsepower less than what he had before. So we checked it for boost leaks, the engine sounds healthy, valve lash is good, and we are kind of assuming that there's a chance he got 03, 04 early injectors in a late 5.9 truck. That would kind of make sense with the horsepower it's making, that maybe the spray pattern is wrong. So we're going to pull it off the dyno, and we're going to put late 5.9 Sportsman injectors in it from Exergy. We happen to have a set on the shelf, so we're going to put the injectors in it, put it back on the dyno, and see if we can get his 70 horsepower back with the correct injectors. Okay, we're back on the dyno after Josh put a set of stock replacement injectors in it from Exergy, and we picked up exactly 50 horsepower. Went from 477 horsepower this morning to 427 horsepower this afternoon. And we're not exactly sure why the other injectors did not make the power, because looking at them, they were a 5-hole injector, which is a correct spray pattern, but they were a reman injector. It's kind of a bum deal because the customer was sold these as a new injector, and we ran some part numbers on them, and like the stators on the injectors didn't have any part numbers on it. It was clearly a reman injector, so we're not exactly sure what they did incorrectly with it, but the injectors were off about 50 horsepower. Now we have that issue fixed, and we have a little bit of a oil seep issue out of the head gasket. This has a firing setup with a VP gasket with ARP 2000s. It's something that should be fine for 1,000 horsepower, but there's obviously an issue. He called his engine builder, and they recommended doing a retorque. So Josh is going to pull the valve cover and do a hot retorque, and we're going to see if we can stop this oil seepage issue on the head gasket. Otherwise, it's going to need a head gasket. Okay, it's Monday morning. We did not get the wrap up done on Bill's truck because it was Saturday and we were not full staff. So I'm going to recap a little bit what we did to finish up Bill's truck on the dyno. We had done a retorque, and when we retorqued the head studs did not move. So we ended up pulling the head off of the truck, and we found a lot of leaking was going on there. We had coolant leaking between the ports. The surface of the block was really rusty. The head surface was really rusty, and it looks like it never sealed the head gasket correctly when the engine was assembled. So we decided to do some measuring, started looking. The fire ring was only crushed about 10 thou when the groove depth and the head gasket was set for about 19 to 20 thou groove of crush. So the head studs never had enough power to crush the fire ring enough to get a good seal on the gasket. So our fix, we kind of had very little options since it was Friday, and we're trying to get the customer back to Texas. So we pulled the head, ran it to D&J. They cut the grooves, or resurfaced the head and recut the grooves for an MLS fire ring setup, simply because that's what we've had the most success with. And Josh spent a lot of time cleaning up the surface of the block with a stone. You got to be very careful. You can't just use a whiz wheel on the block, because if you're using an MLS gasket, you need a really nice surface. So he cleaned the rust off with a DA sander, and then finishing everything up with a stone. Got the surface of the block rolled back nice and flat and shiny, and we put the head back on with MLS gasket, fire ring, and ARP 625s. And the 625s gives you enough more crush on the fire ring to make sure that we get a good crush on the head gasket, so we don't have this problem again. So this was probably Friday night by midnight by the time we got the truck out the door after doing a hot retorque. And Saturday morning he came back in, thought he was ready to go home, didn't have air conditioning, and then we found that his AC condenser on the bottom corner was leaking. Didn't look like it got hit. It was just, he's just kind of had a bunch of bad luck this week. So we got his AC condenser replaced Saturday morning, recharged the AC. We made a couple hot laps on it on the street. There was no leaks, and we sent him back home. I got a text from him last night saying that they made it back and everything was good. Truck's running better than ever. So sometimes you do have bad luck with some things like that. That was kind of Bill's week last week. It was like one thing after another, but we were able to get him all fixed up and get him back home.
All right, so we're getting ready to start our next project here, owned by Brian Biltz and his son. They dropped it off to us last Saturday. We're going to be doing a good bit of chassis work to it. Believe at this point the plan is to shorten it into a short bed and rebuild the back half of the truck. We're also going to get ready for their Turbo 400. Currently it has a 48 RE in it, and they're getting a Turbo 400 from Rossler. So that involves changing out the mid plate, moving around engine mounts and stuff like that. So good list of work to do on this thing. I guess it's probably going to be here for a month or two. Not totally sure what all we're going to get into yet, but we're going to get a good start on it here in the next week, and hopefully it should be a pretty cool little truck when we get done with it.
Okay, it's been brought to my attention that a couple of YouTube viewers have been having questions about when we rattle off turbo sizes. A lot of times we'll dyno a truck, we'll say it has a 728710, or we say have a compound setup that's a 728710 over a 48896 132. That'd be the sizes that's on the quad cab. So what do those numbers really mean? And that's what I want to explain to you, try to put it in a term that is easily explained. So when we say a 728710, the first number that we say would be the inducer side of the compressor wheel. So that means when you take your air filter off, the first bit of the wheel that you measure is 72 millimeters. That's the inducer side of your compressor wheel. So your compressor wheel actually is small in the front, and then it has bigger in the back. So there's actually two different measurements of the compressor wheel, but we generally don't reference the back side of it just for simplicity's sake. That's if you're really coming down to analyzing a turbo and how it flows, then yes, you look at the whole picture. But for face value, if I ask you what size your turbo, you're going to tell me it's a 72 millimeter, 75 millimeter, 80 millimeter. We're talking about the compressor size right here. So the second number, if I say a 728710, the first number is the compressor wheel. The second number is the turbine wheel. So we've now referenced the compressor wheel size, the turbine wheel size, and then the third number, the 10, would be the aspect ratio of your exhaust housing. So all of your housings, either compressor and exhaust housing, have an aspect ratio, and that is a it's a calculated. They take the radius from the center of the wheel to the outside of the housing plus the area, and they calculate what the aspect ratio, turbine wheel versus the housing size. That's how they come up with an aspect ratio. You can Google AR of a turbo, and there's a lot of reading of it. I won't bore you with all the details of it, but I wanted to give you guys a quick crash course on the sizing of the turbo. So if we rattle off a number, it's not 100% French to you guys. So if I say it's a 75, 96, 132, that means it's got a 75 millimeter compressor wheel, a 96 millimeter turbine wheel, and a 132 AR exhaust housing. If you're really more interested in the stuff, do a quick Google search, because there's tons of information reading on it, and I'd be glad to explain it more in depth. Rather than us say we have a 72 millimeter inducer and a 113 millimeter exducer on the compressor wheel, and a 87 millimeter inducer and an 80 millimeter exducer, it becomes complicated. We generally just reference the smallest size, the face value of the compressor wheel, and the smallest size of your turbine wheel, the size that you see. So 72 millimeter and 87 millimeter would be the ones that I was referencing. So hopefully that better explains some of those numbers. If you guys got any other questions about things we talk about or we reference like it's part of our daily lives, we get so used to referencing these numbers because we do it every day. If you've got little things like that you got questions on, just post it in the comments and we'd be glad to do a short video explaining it.